sore and putting her immediately on the defensive. It's right up there with those other religious questions like, have you been born again? Are you saved? Have you accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior? These are questions, in my experience, that turn otherwise intelligent, liberal folk into inarticulate, blithering fools. And they are questions that too often, in my experience at least, are meant to be a test of your faith. Do you measure up? Do you fit? Are your beliefs orthodox enough? Meaning, are they the same as mine and therefore correct? Maybe it's my suspicious nature, but I suspect that these questions are meant to be a kind of a litmus test of our orthodoxy. 7 weeks ago, on July the 12th, in my sermon, You Must Be Born Anew, I shared with you the household of faith template, a way to help people to talk about how they became part of a faith community. And just to recap, a reminder for those who were there and explanation for those who weren't. The household of faith is a house. Picture a simple diagram of a house that's divided into 4 rooms. And these 4 rooms indicate how you came to be part of a faith community. And the 4 rooms are nurture, meaning that you grew up in the church. Conversion, usually meaning that you had some kind of a transformation in your life, possibly a dramatic transformation, a conversion experience. The 3rd room is doing ministry, for example, volunteering at a drop-in or for Out of the Cold, or getting involved with refugee sponsorship. And finally, the 4th room is assent to correct belief, meaning that a person examines the beliefs of a certain faith group and agrees with them, and therefore makes a decision to become a part of that group. So those are the 4 rooms. And as I said then, most people enter into a community of faith through one of those rooms, or possibly a combination of rooms at different times in their lives. For example, I'm certainly part of the church through the 1st room, nurture. I was born into the United Church, I was raised in the church, and I have never not been a part of the Christian church. As I get older, though, it's become more and more important to me that my religious beliefs have intellectual integrity. So I'm not about to say that I believe something unless it makes sense to me. And I'm not about to say that I believe something that I don't believe, or to say that I believe something simply because as a Christian, I'm supposed to believe that. Don't tell me that I'm not a real Christian unless I believe some obscure theological doctrine about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, a question attributed to Thomas Aquinas, or about the Trinity, or the atonement, or the eschatology. I believe in mystery, but not magic. And so believing, or assent to correct belief, is not wrong, but it's also not the only way. It's not the whole truth for most people. Assent to correct belief is just one of the many ways that people come to be a part of the church. Believing is more important to some people than it is to others. Now, I know that I've been with you enough times that you know that I'm a big fan of the late Marcus Borg. I refer to him often in my sermons, and I probably will continue to do that. In his book, Reading the Bible Again for the First Time, Borg says that being a Christian, living a Christian life, is not about believing so much as it is about being in a relationship with God, and by association, a relationship with other people and with all of creation. And Borg uses an interesting analogy to illustrate this, an image that he borrows from Buddhism. And some of you may be familiar with this. Buddhists often speak of the teaching of the Buddha as being a finger pointing to the moon. Now, this metaphor helps us to guard against the mistake of thinking that being a Buddhist means believing in Buddhist teaching. That is, believing in the finger. Instead, one is to see and to pay attention to not the finger, but that to which the finger points. And so if we take that analogy and use it in a Christian context, we can apply this metaphor, for example, to the Bible. For Christians, the Bible is a finger pointing to God. And some Christians, too, make the mistake of thinking that being a Christian is about believing in the Bible, believing in the finger, rather than seeing the Christian life as a relationship with that to which the Bible points, to God, to the Spirit, to the divine, the sacred, whatever you call that. So being a Christian is not so much about believing in Christianity, it's about a relationship with God, with other people, and with all of creation. Or we could apply the metaphor to Jesus. Do you believe in Jesus? Some people might ask. Well, for those of us who grew up in the church, believing in Jesus often meant believing things about Jesus. That he was born of a virgin, that he performed miracles, that he was divine, that he rose from the dead. But now, I see that believing in Jesus means something very different from that. And the difference is explained by looking at the root meaning of the word believe. To believe did not originally mean believing a set of doctrines or teachings. In both Latin and Greek, the root meaning of the word believe means to give one's heart to. The heart being the self at its deepest level. And I think it was Borg, but possibly also Diana Butler-Bass, who said that beloved would actually be a much more accurate translation of the word than believe. So believing does not mean giving one's mental or intellectual assent to something, but involves a much deeper level of the self. Believing in Jesus does not mean the same thing as believing things about Jesus. It doesn't mean believing doctrines, dogmas, creeds, and articles of faith about Jesus. Rather, it means to give one's heart to give oneself at its very deepest level to the teachings, the ministry, and the values that Jesus embodied. As the writer of the book of James says, believing something, well, he basically says that doesn't amount to a hill of beans. So you believe in God, he says, big deal. Even the demons believe in God. What's important is what you do after you say, I believe. There are a whole bunch of problems, as I see it, with this emphasis on belief as a test of our commitment to Christianity. And I'm going to talk just about two of those problems. The first problem is that it's virtually impossible to verify beliefs. By their very nature, beliefs are subjective. They're personal. I, as an individual, I can take steps to verify somebody's honesty. I can test the trustworthiness of a surgeon or a mechanic or a plumber by various means. I can ask other people, or I can ask for a reference. And I can study the claims made by this scientist or that mathematician. But how do you verify the existence of God, or even falsify it, for that matter? The answer, of course, is that you can't. And the paradox of this is captured in the words of the father who brought his sick child to Jesus to be healed in our gospel reading this morning from Mark. I believe, the father said, help my unbelief. A very honest and transparent answer. The second problem, I think, is far more serious, and that is the consequences, the actions of those who make claims of absolute truth. Charles Kimball, in his book, When Religion Becomes Evil, describes 5 warning signs of corruption in religion. And the first of those is making claims of absolute truth. Now, of course, every religion makes claims about what it believes to be true. Every religion has a collection of beliefs which form the foundation of their faith. But when particular narrow interpretations of those claims become declarations requiring uniform consent and are treated as rigid doctrines which you have to pledge allegiance to, then that, says Kimball, is a problem. That's a danger sign. That's a warning sign of the corruption and the evil, or possibly even the violence, to follow. And of course, what is lacking in these rigid and uniform systems of belief is, in a word, humility. The recognition that we human beings are limited in our understanding and articulation of religious truth. Fundamentalists of all stripes would have us believe their version of the truth. But experience teaches us that the most basic truths in any religion make many assumptions and include many interpretations. And sincere people of faith can and do hear and interpret faith in substantially different ways. Human beings are subjective. We're conditioned in ways that we're not even aware of. For example, the fact that I was born in the early 50s, in the midst of the post-World War II baby boom, that I was raised on a farm in rural Ontario of Scottish Presbyterian United Church stock. All of this has molded me in ways that I may never fully understand. My background and my experience shape the way I look at the world, and they shape the way I ask religious questions. And this is neither good nor bad, it just is. But it does mean that my experiences and my understandings of God, however powerful and life-changing these have been for me, do not exhaust all the possibilities. And this is true for all of us. Some people view faith as a set of beliefs and requirements, rigid doctrines that can easily turn into a set of rules and regulations. And you know, some people like that because some people don't like ambiguity. And it makes it easier to figure out who's in and who's out, who's acceptable and who's not acceptable, who's good enough and who's not good enough. Neat little categories, neat little boxes to contain people. It's a form of fundamentalism, of course. But more and more of us these days prefer to talk about faith as a relationship that involves one in a journey of transformation. Faith is as much about the journey toward belief as it is about arriving at belief. There's a hymn that many of us learned, I think, for the first time when Voices United came out. It was certainly new to me. We're going to be singing it in a few minutes. It's become, I think, a favorite of a lot of United Church people. I was there to hear your boarding cry. And I've had lots of people, and it'll be interesting to hear from you after the service, tell me that they cry when they sing this hymn because it's so emotional and so moving for a lot of people. So this hymn doesn't talk about belief at all, but rather recounts a faith journey much like mine and possibly yours, from birth to baptism, to childhood, to adolescent, to partnership, to middle age, to old age, and eventually death, with the assurance of God's constant presence with us through all of those stages of our lives. Celebrate the journey, it seems to say. Cherish the relationships, enjoy the experience along the way, and don't worry so much about the destination. The Christian life is not so much about believing a set of claims to be true, but about a way, a journey, a path of transformation that leads to God and to participation in the passion of God. So we'll be singing that hymn in just a minute, but there's another hymn by the hymn writer Ruth Duck that also says it very well, and her hymn is called As the Fire is Meant for Burning. And in that hymn, Ruth Duck says that the mission of the church is not to preach our creeds and customs, but to build a bridge of care. This is the mission of the church, not to make our creeds and doctrines and beliefs hoops through which people must jump in order to be considered good Christians, but rather to build bridges of care, to be, as the hymn goes on to say, learners, teachers, pilgrims, seekers, givers, vessels made of clay, and that our lives be reflections of God's realm in this world. Thanks be to God.